Wajahat, in your own words, what is your book about?
This book is a love letter to a country that often doesn't love the rest of us back. It's an elegy for the rest of us, and it's a self-help guide about how you too can become an American.
This week on Lit Up, I'm speaking with Wajahat Ali, author of the book Go Back to Where You Came From and Other Helpful Recommendations on How to Be American. Wajahat is a natural storyteller, and though he would never say it, a gifted comedian. I had a wonderful time learning about his family and how he met his wife, and the way his life has been shaped by being Muslim in America. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Wanted to kick it off whether you wouldn't mind reading one or two of those email and responses that you write in
These
front
lovely,
of the book.
helpful emails that I get sent on a daily basis, these wonderful, warm suggestions. Of course, I'd be honored.
That would be wonderful. So you can kind of pick one or two
Sure.
potentially, and then we can unpack them a bit.
I'll do the first two. So these are emails that I get, or refrains of emails I get almost on a daily basis. And so this is fan mail number 1. Go back to where you came from. My response: Fremont, California. I'd love to, but I can't afford the rent. I'm priced out. Damn you tech overlords. Another email I get all the time in different variations is the following. Fan mail number 2. Why don't you shut up and go fuck a goat, you Muslim terrorist? And my response: always with the goats and camels. Why limit my options? 2 legs good, 4 legs good. But no thank you, I'm happily married to a woman. Also, it's Muslim terrorist, unless you're referring to muslin, which is a versatile cotton fabric originally hailing from Mosul, Iraq, and typically has not been associated with overt acts of violent extremism. Nonetheless, I appreciate the helpful recommendation.
Well, let that just be an inkling as to how Wajahat takes something that's, awful and racist and bigoted and kind of twists it to become something incredibly funny by pushing it back onto that horrible person that sends you something like that.
If you are a person of color or Muslim in the public arena, you will get emails like this every single day, my entire career. And I remember first and foremost, I started getting this when my email was used by my roommate at the time at UC Berkeley, who decided to put me as the media liaison for the UC Berkeley Muslim Students Association because I was on the board. And he was very gifted on creating websites, so he just did it for free. He put my email there, and then 9/11 happened. I was a 20-year-old senior about to turn 21, undeclared at UC Berkeley when the 2 towers fell. And overnight, even though the towers fell in New York and the terrorist act was done by 19 foreign hijackers, 15 from Saudi Arabia, I think 2 from UAE, 1 from Lebanon, 1 from Egypt, all the way across the country in California where I was at, we were getting hate mails and we were blamed for the terrorists who committed those violent acts, even though I'm an American-born citizen and my family members, my parents, are immigrants from Pakistan. But bigots don't care. Racism flattens everyone. And so that's when I started getting these type of really ugly messages through email, right? Because I was the only email contact and people were blaming me and saying, why you Muslims did this. And then, I kind of used that moment to respond to a few folks. And one person in particular, I remember was a woman. She said, I'm sorry. I got very angry. I shouldn't have sent that email. It's just that I'm so hurt and in pain by what's happening. Why do the Muslims do this? And it became kind of like an opening for a back and forth, because what email and social media in particular has done is it flattens all of us and essentializes us to our one trait. You become your last tweet, your last post, your last article, your last media appearance. You don't become a complex human who might have a particular political take on something, but also has kids and watches Netflix and eats Cheetos, and you might agree with them on 8 out of 10 things, right? You don't have to see the person. So you can inspire your worst demons to come out. But now what I've noticed, interestingly, in 2022, especially 2021, is that back in the day, they used to be anonymous. Now they're no longer anonymous. They use their full name.
So there's
they don't even hide anymore.
Ugh.
There's almost like an emboldened spirit, if you will. I wonder why.
Well, that leads me to so much of your work has always been about delving deeply into this country, racism, and what it's like, for many different people's experiences. But when did you have that moment where, like, I have to write a book about this?
I think there's two parts to the question. One part is proactive in the sense that I've always enjoyed telling stories. And I want to really stress on enjoyment. I enjoyed making people laugh. I enjoyed telling stories. I was good at it. I discovered it when I was 10 years old in fifth grade when Mrs. Peterson asked me to write a one-page short story, and I wrote a 10-page creative short story. And I was a fat, awkward, shy kid, and she made me recite the story in front of the homeroom class, and I begged her not to because they always used to make fun of me because I was a fat kid. I recited the story, but I had them wrapped with attention. And I'm like, I might have something here. So I always enjoyed it. That's the key. Secondly, I think during the pandemic in particular, I've been trying to write a book for 9 years. I just couldn't get it. I just couldn't get a narrative arc, right? And my agent's been on my ass. He goes, just write stories and we'll figure it out later. So when I was coming up with the outline, there was something about living through Nuseba, my daughter's cancer, and then the pandemic and the Trump years and thinking about the future in America, where, the personal is the political. And I realized, maybe my take on things and maybe what I've been trying to write about, there will be now a receptive audience because I've always tried to connect the dots. And I thought, maybe I can weave this narrative tale, do a type of a tongue-in-cheek memoir, make it a little bit stylistically different where I can talk about both the American dream and the American nightmare. And let's see if I can use humor and some satire, also throw it in there, and then end on hope. And then I realized that, it took me, I always joke with people, it took me 3 months to write the first draft, which I blazed through it. But those 3 months, it took me 40 years to write, if that makes sense. Even though the first draft, I blazed through in 3 months.
Well, I think you capture the beauty of life and of love with the darker side. And that's also comedy, isn't it? I don't think we can have comedy without the knowledge of the darkness, because the joy and tragedy and racism and love are also entwined in your book. And I feel like that story you start with about your very nerdy father, how he ended up coming to America, seems as it's a framework for your own experiences in terms of those two, the kind of the dark and the light, and how often they're so intertwined.
My father had never told me that story until I interviewed him for this book. And I think it's a beautiful microcosm of America's generosity and America's viciousness, of its cruelty and its openness. My dad comes here with his brother Sultan. I think they were 18 and 19. And he's like, what the hell is happening in this country? It was 66, he said he came in, right? Like Nixon is about to come around. There's Vietnam War. There's protests, the race riots. He's like, what? Where did I land? And he ditches the kurta and the shalwar kameez for bell bottoms and hippie hair, which is hilarious because I thought my father was born bald in Docker pants. And, hardworking student, brilliant student, nerd, applies to graduate school, gets a scholarship, goes in Chicago at that time. And he says back in the day it was pretty easy. He used to go to apply for extension. It wasn't that big of a line. It was a pretty simple process. And he says the immigration officer, he could just tell, he just from the look, he looks him up and down. He could just tell this guy was going to be vicious. And he mutters to him, you Arabs only come here to America to fuck our American girls. I'm going to deny you, deport. And my father's like, first of all, I'm not Arab. Second of all, what? And then he goes, but I have everything. Everything's here. And he goes, nope. And he just stamped it, my father said. And he just didn't care and he looked away. So my father says, okay, I only have like a little bit of time left. I have a deportation order. I have to get out of here. So he bought a one-way ticket back to Karachi. But he said, let me just try this last week to exhaust all my options. So he goes all around Chicago. Young man, doesn't have that much money, trying to get advice. And everyone says, according to him, you're effed. I don't know what to do here. He goes to this final law office, he says, in Hoffman Estates, which is a suburb in Chicago, but a random detail my father remembered. And he said, the attorney said, I can't do anything to help you. But he said there was another young man there, a young attorney who was waiting to get his bar results. And I think he was going to join that law firm. And he said, I've been hearing your case, and I think you don't cancel the ticket. Stay, because I think you actually apply for something called the Einstein visa. Visa is given to those who have exceptional merit and are researchers. And it was also given to Melania Trump. So my father was this brilliant student who was a researcher and got a scholarship, and Melania Trump posed naked on a fur rug in an airplane. Both of them had exceptional talents valued by the United States of America. So he said, pro bono, since I can't practice law, I'll help you do this paperwork and I'll go with you to the immigration court. And so he goes with them, accompanies my father. And my father says there was a judge, a kindly judge. And my father assumes just from his name, last name, he thinks he was Jewish. And he said the judge just looked at all the evidence, shook his head with disgust because he kind of realized what had happened. And he said, I'm sorry this has happened to you. You can stay, provide me with the paperwork, and we'll process your visa. And he says a few months later, expedited paperwork, and boom, he got to stay in America, and where he eventually became a citizen. And so that's the story of American cruelty and American generosity.
I mean, that's such a foundational family story.
There's so many foundational stories. There's so many things that happen to us as individuals that we take for granted or we assume incorrectly that no one would care. And then once you just share your story, you realize, wow, that's profound.
Well, there's a quote in your book I'm going to read back to you because it relates exactly to this. And you say, in America, if you aren't writing your story will always be written for you. If you aren't telling your story will always be told for you. And you obviously telling your own story and the story of your family.
That's why I wanted to put it in the book, because oftentimes there's almost this veil, especially with immigrant generations, where you just think your uncles and aunties, we say the elders in our communities are uncles and aunties, are like these Spartan, like perfect specimens who were like birthed with like, hijabs and kufis and never sinned. And then you realize, no, they're interesting, complex people who actually had hopes and dreams, and they laugh. Who would have thought?
But you've been through a lot with your parents. I mean, I was reading your book, and then there's a part that it was shocking because I didn't want you or them to have to go through a hardship. And can you talk about what did happen? So you've told us about where you were on 9/11, a 20-year-old at Berkeley being confronted with what's happening with the world. But you had also had a kind of cataclysmic experience with your own family.
Yeah, so, 9/11 was a kind of baptism by fire, I always say, like for our generation, especially young Muslims in this country, but not specifically limited to Muslims. It was a fork in the road. There was always a pre-9/11 and a post-9/11, but especially for our communities, I think Muslim communities or those who look Muslim-y, it was like people forget how crazy those times were. America went so nuts that we changed the name of French fries to freedom fries because France originally was critical of the war on terror. That's how crazy it was for those who are listening and are young, right? And I was 20, and I was about to turn 21, and an undeclared student, senior year, trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. And I joke that my generation jokes were individuals like me who are around my age who were in that similar situation. We just joked that overnight we became the Muslim fireman and the Muslim Wikipedia. There's all this chaos. You have to go douse the fires. And you have to explain Islam and explain Muslims and Sharia and Hakim Olajuwon and hummus and Hamas and Iran and Iraq in front of a skeptical judge, jury, and executioner that even in 2021 now still holds our patriotism as suspect, right? So that's happening. And on a personal level now, a few months after 9/11, I'm about to graduate. My parents get arrested in something called Operation Cyberstorm. And the FBI comes down to the Bay Area. Robert Mueller at that time was the head of the FBI, teams up with Microsoft and says that we have uncovered the largest piracy ring ever and swept up like 24 people. And my parents' names were on the front page of the FBI. My parents were sleeping in their old man Costco sleeping uniform at 6 a.m. and dozens of like armed agents came, dragged them out of bed. Parents had no idea what the hell was happening. Then my father read the 31 count indictment, almost passed out. I got a call from my aunt. I was at UC Berkeley. She says, yeah, you should come home. Your parents have been arrested. I'm like, what? Why did they get swept up? And I joke about this in the book all the time. Like all this weird, terrible luck that happened to my family is they were in the same office complex as apparently this was happening. They did a separate business with Microsoft, which they had finished. They had moved on. They were like, hey, this was good business. It was like a licensing thing with educational software. Business was successful. Everyone made money. They took that money and started their own website. And so Microsoft, because of the timing and the location, and Microsoft was involved, they cast a wide net and also got my parents in on a separate count. But it doesn't matter because as far as the media is concerned, the headline leads the story. If you aren't telling your story is being told to you by others. And so all the people saw was Pakistani couple swept up in piracy ring. And Microsoft then put this absurd number of damages at 100 million from the educational business. Had nothing to do with piracy. So all people saw was scammers, Pakistani immigrant family defrauds Microsoft of 100 million, part of piracy ring, which was not the case either. So everyone thought I was sitting on $100 million. And I remember I called up my parents. I'm like, listen, I have no idea what you guys did or didn't do. But if you guys got this 100 million, I could really use it right now. And so that then became this overnight wake-up call where we became them. When I mentioned that it was up to then, I was protected. Suburban Muslim Pakistani American kid going to college. My parents had their ups and downs in business. Sometimes they had money, sometimes they didn't. But still, I was mostly in a cocoon. But that's when I decided I was going to be living also on, not when I studied, but fate decided that I would be living in the other America, the America of the poor, of the incarcerated, of the black and brown folks. So it was such a schizophrenic Twilight Zone existence from that moment on, because I had one foot in privileged suburban America, UC Berkeley student, had just gotten into law school, and another foot where I'm visiting about both my parents in jail at the same time, trying to raise funds. The house was gone, the money's gone, I'm in debt, my credit shot to hell, and my life, at least for my 20s, I thought it was over, because now I'm bankrupt. And my parents went to jail for a year. That's how long it took me to finally raise the funds to get them out on bail. This insane case went on for almost 8.5 years. They decided not to take the plea bargain because they said, we didn't do anything wrong, we want to fight. And I said, okay, I could see that, it's like the Crucible, the scene in the Crucible. It's my name. Yeah. So, in hindsight, they probably should have just taken the plea agreement. They're going against Microsoft and the government. But I said, okay, if you really feel you haven't done anything, fight. They rebuild their life. I graduated from law school. I'm a writer. Everyone who was initially cruel in the community says, look at that, the Alis came out. Okay, good for them. This is done. They became nice again. And I'm about to turn 30, I think. And the case was on appeal. And I get a call from the attorney. Very bad news. Sorry, Wajahat, they lost their case. And right then, my father gets arrested. After being out for 7.5 years of rebuilding their life. And then the judge tells my mom, you have 6 months. I'll give you 6 months to self-report. And then, I was staying at home. I was a poor writer. It was the recession. I was starting my career. People knew me as a writer, as a playwright, as an attorney. All my friends said, Wajahat's the guy who made it. But in my life, it was chaos, right? So that's the schizophrenic Twilight Zone experience that privately I was going through the hell experienced by millions of Americans. But publicly, if I had told you at that time, Angela, what I was going through, you'd be like, whoa, Waj, you're crushing it, Waj. You just wrote a play and I saw you in the New York Times. And I'm like, no, I'm about to be homeless. And whenever I used to say this to people, it was like a horror movie because no one used to believe me. So that's why I stopped telling people, because they're like, whoa, Waj, you're just silly. And so that's a part of the story that I have never really shared in depth. You asked me and I gave you in 5 minutes a little nugget. I hope that was helpful.
Well, while this was happening, while you had your friends saying, things look so great from the outside, you've just, been in the New York Times, you're on the rise, while you were having such a personal crisis. Through that period, were you writing with a comedic voice still, or did you find that part was lost a little? Or
I think I was writing with a comedic voice, even though, so my personality, according to people who knew me, and I could look back upon myself with some fresh objective eyes, from the ages of, they said from 21 to 27, I became very hard. And I think that I became hardened through time. Yeah, because I had to survive. It was survival. It was a fight flight my entire 20s. And so, but at the same time, despite my efforts to harden myself, my mom said I was forcing myself to be something I'm not. Because she said your natural disposition is to be friendly and generous with people and to be funny. And it used to just crack through all the time. And it came through my writing, especially in my play. So in my play, which I wrote after my parents got out, which ended up being a very restorative exercise. This play that I had started writing for my short story writing class at UC Berkeley, then that play got delayed because of my parents' arrest. And then my professor, Ishmael Reed, came back and said, keep writing the play. So that became the play of the Domestic Crusaders, which then became a small hit. And if people read the play, they're always shocked by the amount of humor that's in the play. And the play is about a Pakistani Muslim American family living in the shadow in the aftermath of 9/11. And even though there's a lot of deep stuff that's talked about, there's just a lot of humor. So I think that's how I've always processed life, is through the two masks of theater, the sadness and the Joker, right? And like you said earlier before, there's we oftentimes have to find joy through the pain, or else life becomes unbearable. So you laugh or cry. You sometimes do both. I'm not one for crying, so I laugh. And through laughter, I think through humor, if used wisely, it can be a very powerful weapon.
And growing up, who did you look to for, other comedic voices to emulate, or along your way, who has influenced you in terms of,
Oh, that's a good question.
developing your own voice?
For me, it was, believe it or not, stand-up comedy and stand-up comedians, in the sense that we early on really, like, my friend circles and I got into like Monty Python and Mel Brooks, and very early on, perhaps too early, Eddie Murphy's stand-up comedy routines. And then once I got into Eddie Murphy at an early age, I brought in George Carlin. And then it was my circle of friends, especially at Bellarmine High School, where every day we used to eat at the Hill, just the mound of grass, but we just call it the Hill. And I just came to, like, every day I tried to make them laugh so hard that at least one person would choke on their food or like spit milk. And I was very successful. And I remember that kind of became honed more as a skill with improv comedy. There was an improv comedy troupe, Sanguine Humors. We took ourselves pretty seriously. We like studied practice every week, and we did shows. And I got in. And then in college, that then became the sketch comedy troupe that I did for fun. And so, like, there has always been an appreciation for comedy and comedians. I do not consider myself a comedian or a stand-up comedian, but I always appreciated it as an art form. And so I always indulged as a fan, and then I tried to practice just, for fun. And apparently I was successful, to the point where in high school, my friends and my friends' parents thought I would either grow up to be a film director, storyteller, or a stand-up comedian. And I ended up becoming a writer and attorney. But, comedy has played a very huge role in my life, not just as a fan and observer, but how I have used that. And that's how I got my wife. Everyone just jokes. They're like, Sarah literally could have had anybody, and she married you when you were completely broke, when your parents were in jail, when you had no money, when your credit was shot to hell. And people ask Sarah, like, what did you see in the guy? And she goes, he made me laugh.
That's right.
So I'm like, all right. So like, I feel like humor has been very helpful to me in understanding this universe, my place in the universe, as a weapon to booby trap some of this racist stereotypes, to fight back against bullies, and to get a wife.
How did you meet her then?
I was broke as broke in the Bay, even though everyone thought I was crushing it. I was like 31, right before my parents 29, right before my parents got arrested again. And my wife, Sarah, was like doing one of these 47 fellowships that doctors do. She had just been divorced for the second time, which was its own scarlet letter and trauma in South Asian Muslim communities, right? And she was about to move to DC, where she was going to take a job at a healthcare clinic. And so our small circle of friends just met up, and we just got along, and I made her laugh. And she was like, every guy wanted her. Even though she just got divorced again, every guy wanted her. So my G-chat game, I must say, Angela.
Strong.
I'll take on anyone. My G-chat game, I'm Cyrano de Bergerac. I crush. Instant Messenger, deep cut for you kids in the 90s. And my G-chat game, anyone, bring on anyone. I'll take on anyone, right? And so we used to talk as friends. And then she said, after like a month of talking, she goes, I don't talk to guys like this, like late at night. Like, I'm interested in you, which is usually what happens with women. You often have said, hey, idiot, I like you. And I'm like, what? I'm fat. You're like, no, you haven't been fat for 10 years. They're like, oh, when you're fat, you're always a fat kid. So she told me she liked me. I freaked out because my parents, I think, we still didn't know what was happening with the case. I was living at home. I was broke. And I was like, my life is chaos. I can't tell you more. And so we said, we'll just stay friends. She moves to DC. I'm in the Bay Area. I end up going to DC on and off to do a job, a think tank report called Fear Inc. In DC, our small circle of friends merge, and then that becomes my crew. And on and off, a lot of people said, you and Sarah have something. You guys, I think, she's looking for someone, you're looking for someone. I'm like, no, we're just friends. Well, we're just friends. My parents end up going to jail again. I'm 31. I just had my 31st birthday. It's Thanksgiving, about a few days after Thanksgiving. I have a near-death experience, which I mentioned in the book, and I survived that near-death experience. And I'll tell you, the near-death experience very quickly was I had this condition called supraventricular tachycardia, where the heart rate jumps up randomly, or you sound like a tabla remix of like Bitches Brew, right? Like that's like your heart, and you end up passing out. It's just a condition that I had. It got worse in the 20s, especially with all the stress. It was very manageable. But in the 20s, it just started accelerating, but still manageable. I should have gone this heart surgery called ablation, but I'm like, you really want to do heart surgery in their 20s when you don't need to? So I said, no reason. I go to the friggin' 24-hour fitness for a lame-ass elliptical workout because I had 20 minutes. I'm doing this lame-ass elliptical workout. My heart rate jumps up. I pass out. I wake up. My heart rate was at 230. So they rush me to the hospital. They give me all the drugs. Nothing works. Now, if your heart rate's at 230 resting for a long period of time, bad things happen. Congestive heart failure happens. So now I'm having congestive heart failure at the age of 31, sweating profusely in my nasty ass Hanes undershirt and my oversized gym shorts and sneakers. And my corner of the emergency room is the most popping place, surrounded by nurses and doctors who are more freaked out than I am. If you're ever in the hospital and the healthcare professionals are more terrified than you, that's a sign bad things are happening. So they cardioverted me 3 times, and cardioversion is defibrillation, 3, 2, 1, clear.
Whoa.
None of them work. If anyone who's listening who's been in a near-death situation, you'll empathize. You just know. Your body knows. That's all I can say. You know how you have a sixth sense? You have elders sometimes who say, I'm going to go next week. You're like, what are you talking about? And then they die. It's just a sixth sense. Your body knows, like the universe gives you this special power. So I knew my time was running out. I had pulmonary edema. I was choking on my own phlegm. Everything was out of sync. My heart rate was still at 230. I went through the whole negotiation with God. You think audit of my entire life, regrets, prayers. And then finally it came to the point where I said, I've had a very good life. And if this is my exit, so be it. I can't complain. And I made peace with my exit. My only regret, Angela, was I'm dying alone. Not literally alone. Like I didn't invest in a relationship, in a family. I was too afraid. Well, not afraid, but I'm like, who would marry me? Number one. And then number two, I said, it's irresponsible of me to marry anyone because why would I bring this baggage into some woman's life? That was my martyrdom. But then as I was literally dying, I said, damn, I should have invested in a relationship. That's the one regret I had. And I swear to God, after that regret, my heart rate stabilized. And then I can't help but be a storyteller and be poetic about this. And I'm like, that must be a sign. And so, I felt like I got extra time. And then you can't help but be changed coming from that experience. And I looked at the world a bit differently. I was very grateful. And I said, maybe I should put myself out there. And that's what started me thinking maybe I should talk to Sarah. And so like a loser sitting in California 9 years ago at the age of, 31, I called up a mutual friend, Uzma, who's in DC. And I said, Uzma, can you ask Sarah if I can call her later tonight with the intention of maybe talking to her to maybe go out? And she's like, what the hell's wrong with you? This is not the 18th century. Just call her, man. This is not a Jane Austen novel. I'm like, just do it. And she goes, you're an idiot. She's going to say yes. Fine. She calls me back an hour later. She goes, just call her tonight. So it's hella awkward, as you can imagine. We talked the first night 3 hours. We talked the second night 3 hours. We talked the third night 3 hours. And all I'll say is this. When you know, you know. And very romantically, at the beginning of the fourth conversation, I said, listen, I love you. I want to marry you. So you want to do this or not? Let's go. And she was like, what? And then a month later, we eloped and got married.
Oh my goodness. I love hearing the story again because just like you say, the joy, there's so much joy. And we're so glad you're here alive with us.
I got very lucky in life. The thing is this, the book, I think you throw the book out there in the universe and you just pray, right? You're like, at the end of the day, I can only control what's in my hands. I can't control how people respond to it. But I've been very lucky and gratified to the response I've gotten back is, I think people appreciate the blunt truth and the pain and the challenges of both life and living in America right now that I don't try to shy away from. But it's done with a lot of humor and it ends with hope. And it's not a type of Hallmark hope or a type of like, let me just be a Hollywood studio and give you this fake bow tie ending. I hope the hope is earned, and so people are like, I didn't expect for the book to be hopeful. and humorous, and that makes me happy.
Yeah, it's a brilliant book, but it's also a human book. And I think you show the humanity in you and your family and other people that you choose to write about in such a full way that we want to be in their orbit, when things are going bad or not going well.
Your check is in the mail, Angela, or I'll Venmo you. These kids like the Venmo.
That's right. That's right. So my last question to everyone is, what lights you up?
That's a very good question. I have to be very honest with you. You asked that question and I got an immediate answer in my mind. So I have to honor it, even though it's going to sound so cliched. My kids, my daughter, and I mentioned this in the book towards the end, she's a stage 4 cancer survivor and a full liver transplant recipient who has just turned 5. And this is now almost the 2-year anniversary of her ringing the bell. For those of you who don't know, ringing the bell means you're cancer free. She rang the bell in January 2 years ago. And we were like, well, what the hell are we going to do with the rest of our life? Because, our last year was just, you can imagine, being hospital parents. And then a month later, pandemic. And so we've been in lockdown for 3 years. And so, but we sit there also, and every day, my wife and I, both independently and together, at least one of us, it's not scripted, it's not scheduled. We make a comment, wow, look at her. Look at that. She's alive. Her hair's come back, full of life. You'll never be able to tell this is a cancer. She went through stage 4 cancer, almost died. Her older brother, Ibrahim, sweet boy, always taking care of her. Our post-pandemic baby, Khadija, crazy wildling, just like the boss, who was born, during the pandemic, I think, a month before the pandemic. All of them are happy. They're in lockdown. They do virtual school because my daughter's immunosuppressed. They should be miserable. They should be mean. They should be cruel, but they're full of life and joy, and they find ways to entertain each other and entertain us. So despite everything that happens, you see them running around giggling, and I'm like, you got to keep fighting. You got to keep fighting for that.
Thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Wajahat Ali. His book, Go Back to Where You Came From, is available now, and you can purchase it via the link on our website, lituppodcast.com. In 2 weeks, I'm speaking with my friend, the writer, podcaster, actor, and comedian Maeve Higgins about her new book, Tell Everyone on This Train I Love Them. Lit Up is a podcast from Sugar 23. It's hosted by me, Angela Ledgerwood, and is produced by Liam Billingham, a real goofball. Mike Mayer and Michael Sugar are the executive producers. The theme music is by Andrei Radovsky. Until next time, bye everyone.